Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and welcome to our wonderful panel focusing on scaling supply chain through partnerships. My name is Amit Arel. I'm a partner with Deloitte in Israel, leading the Catalyst platform. And today we have great panels with you to discuss the exact topic. The session today will have a few parts. The first part will present ourselves and kind of who we are, the background, so you'll know how to leverage the things that we'll say today. The second part is going to be a quick overview of the types of partnerships we have when we think about scaling supply chain. And then we'll go into our conversation or panel where we'll address some of the questions on mind. We would love to get questions from you and insights, everything that might be relevant. So please use the chat and we'll get that, and hopefully we'll be able to answer as many questions as possible. So just before we start, just a kind of introduction of the group we'll have here. We have wonderful representatives from different parts of the global ecosystem. We have Ezra Arison from Dell, and she'll present herself in a second, coming live from Turkey. We have Steve Sattler from Williap, coming live very early morning in San Francisco, and Lotan here in Tel Aviv, close to where I am as well. So just to kick things off, again, my name is Amit Arel, a partner with Deloitte in Israel, focusing on bringing our global clients together with the local ecosystem here through a platform that we've created called Catalyst, focusing on different areas, working with startups, early stage until the largest are possible, and also with our largest clients about making innovation real. Before we go into the topic, I would love that the participant or the panelists will present themselves, starting with you, Ezra.
Sure. Do you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here. So maybe first of all, real quick, for those who are not familiar with Dell, so our ambition at Dell is to become the most innovative, customer-centric, inclusive, and sustainable material science company. We've been around quite some time, so I guess many of you have already heard about us, but we operate in more than 30 countries across the globe, and we employ more than 37,000 employees. So scaling in supply chains is definitely a problem that we face with everything we do today. So maybe a little bit about myself. I currently work as innovation manager at Dell, and I am leading the supply chain innovation in Europe, Middle East, Africa, and India at Dell. I'm part of the Digital Fulfillment Center. At Dell, we have 3 digital centers. One is focused on operations, digital operations. From which Sarah Bodo, I know she's one of the panelists in one of the sessions tomorrow, is attending this conference. And we have a third center, which is more focused on commercial applications in digital space. I've been with Dell for 7 years. I worked in different functions, different geographies. As innovation manager, maybe a little bit about what I do at Dell is I look at project shaping, ideation. So when businesses have problems, they reach out to us and we look at the right fits, digital solutions for their problems. So I am heavily involved in that shaping phase, but I also half of my time, I also work as a developer. We have an in-house development team at Digital Fulfillment Center. So I work as a Scrum developer myself too. Again, happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Excellent. Steve, now to you. And Steve even has a short video for us.
Thanks, Amit. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. So if you think about it, we're all surrounded by a sea of energy, radio frequency energy, television, radio, cellular, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and it's all just waiting for a company to tap into it. And that's what Williap is doing. We are a cloud and semiconductor company that is harvesting radio frequency energy to power a computer the size of a postage stamp. And if you look at my thumbnail, you can maybe see a roll of these. Actually, maybe not because of this background. But anyway, think of a postage stamp. It's got an ARM processor, 3 cores, memory. And our mission is to connect everything to the internet, not just the expensive things. And we believe in doing that, we are changing the way products are manufactured, distributed, sold, used, and even recycled. The use cases are many, so we put a short video together to help you envisage some of the work that we're doing now.
Williap tags are multiprocessor computers that power themselves by harvesting radio waves. Williap tags are battery-free. They can sense and communicate securely with the cloud via Bluetooth technology, are as small as a sticker, and only cost pennies. Now we can connect everything, transforming how products are made, distributed, delivered, sold, used, and recycled. Experts see this as enabling a shift from supply chain to demand chain, a more efficient way of organizing the product lifecycle using demand signals from connected products. With Williap tags, we can track everything in real time, dynamically routing smaller vehicles, traveling shorter routes by delivering the right product to the right stores, targeting the right shelves, saving billions of dollars through leaner supply lines, lifting sales, and shrinking our carbon footprint. Demand signals show when products are picked up, when they're moved, and when they leave the store. All of this information about brick and mortar stores allow retailers to use the power of the cloud, similar to an online marketplace. Beyond the store, if someone loses their jacket or passport, it can be found. We can even tell when a product is being used in real time, allowing us to make sure our loved ones take their meds and everyday products are replenished as needed. We can track the temperature and identity of food from farm to store to refrigerator, enabling traceability that makes food safer and ensures it lasts longer, saving millions of dollars in waste. Join us, the people and the companies working to connect everything.
So hopefully that's given you a sense of what we do. We're very fortunate. We have some amazing investors, strategic investors such as Amazon, Alibaba on the e-commerce side, Qualcomm, Samsung on the chip side, M Ventures, the investment arm from Merck, the pharmaceutical company, Maersk, AB Dennison, PepsiCo, Verizon, NTT Docomo. But one of our very first investors, arguably our first investor, was Grove Ventures, and they've really enabled us to deliver what we think is the world's first postage stamp-sized computer powered by radio frequency energy. So that is my introduction. I'm Steve Statler. I'm responsible for business development, product management, and marketing at Williap.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. Now, Lotan, you need to top this. Go ahead.
Oh, it's hard. Thank you everyone for joining today. I'm Lotan Levkowitz. I'm a general partner at Grove Ventures. I think amongst many things, as Steve said, we were very happy and proud to be one of the first backers of Williap. And in the broader picture, we're a venture capital Israeli fund. And we focusing on backing and partnering with entrepreneurs very early on. We like companies that have a lot of technology behind them. So as Steve said, Williap is a semiconductor and cloud company, but we like companies from all colors and technologies. And one of the fundamental theses that we had 6 years ago when we started the fund was a lot about the digital transformation that's happening in many areas of the world. And what led us to focus a lot of our time and energy around Industry 4.0 a few years ago, and drove us to build what's today became like this conference and this ecosystem in Israel. We are big believers and promoters of this topic. Today, we're managing $250 million across 2 funds. And we're very proud, again, to be very to be very involved in this conference with these like great panelists like yourself, and trying to be the bridge between Israeli startups like Williap, global corporates like Dow, with a lot of ecosystem support like Deloitte. So very happy to be here with all my Okta hands shaking and connecting everyone.
Excellent. Thank you, Lotan. So before we go into the topic itself, let's define what partnership is for a second. And we'll have an elaborated discussion on that, but just to frame it for our audience today, when we think about supply chain and we think about partnerships, we identify three categories. The first category is everything about partnership with the corporates, where you're a young startup, you're a mature startup, but basically you're starting to work with corporates, and later on we'll discuss when is the right point for that. But that's thinking about your end customer. You want to become a vendor, but through partnerships, maybe sometimes things are a bit easier. The second kind of partnership that we would like to mention is about what we call alliances, i.e. the large tech companies. And that's really, really important when you think about the value chain and where you as a technology sit within. Because at the end of the day, more and more organizations are going digital. And the way to go digital is to have a technology platform that sits there as the infrastructure. So connecting and partnering with those players is the second second category of partnerships that we will discuss. And the third, which is relatively new and sometimes harder to do, but really important, is what we call startups to startups. The idea of going outside of your own shell, maybe outside of your own body, identify companies that are not competing with you, but actually complementing you and coming together toward a more, let's call it an holistic solution. Now, usually we see this through M&A, where a large company will buy a small company to enhance those capabilities. But what we will discuss today is also when startups are just partnering with startups for the sake of partnerships that has 1 and 1 equals 3. So that's kind of the types of partnership we're going to address today. But before that, and we'll start with the first type of partnership, which is actually the partnership with corporates. And Ezra, this is a question for you. When you think about those partnerships, what are the different models where corporates would like to partner with startups?
Yeah, so there are different ways that we partner with startups. I mean, obviously, one thing we do is we sometimes purchase their services, which gets back to them as some sort of financial support for them to grow their business. But we also do more interesting stuff, such as co-innovation or co-development. In many cases, we see that startups come up with some really good technology, and they have experimented maybe a little bit with like which areas they can use it in, how they can implement it. But we like to have those conversations about how we can build on top of what they are already doing, so they would become a better fit for the real life business challenges and create good success stories for them. We partner with incubators. We find those startups sometimes through incubators. We also have a venture capital arm. So they focus on corporate venturing. So we have those technology scouts out there in the market who are actively looking at new startups out there. And when they see a close fit with Dell's needs, Dell's technology needs, they look for making investments in those startups directly. And maybe under this category, but a different form of investment is as part of those partnerships. Sometimes we provide equipment to startups. We provide laboratories like spaces to work, or sometimes we provide expertise from our end. And also in today's world, data is very important. So we share our data to help them improve their product and work together with them. Those are some examples that I can think of.
And maybe Steve, now to you, the same question, but kind of the other, the other side of the mirror, basically. Ezra really mentioned a few or some types that are similar but different. And I think one of the challenges that many startups have as they grow is the fact that, let's take DAO just for the example, it's one DAO, right? So when you're looking for partnerships, what's the way that you recommend for companies to kind of, what's the path to walk through?
Well, I think it's situational, and you have to, I think, be aware of the strengths and weaknesses of each individual approach. And I think that there's a myriad, but I think of them in three buckets. One bucket is where you have the strategic investment, the ventures group within a large corporate, and they see your technology, they make an investment. We've been very fortunate to be on the receiving end of that. And the fantastic thing there is you have a corporation with money in the game. There's kind of personal reputations on the line. And so they really help to introduce you to operational teams who are ready with a view to actually putting your technology into production. We really like that because our goal is to scale quickly. The challenge with that is sometimes those operational teams have a whole set of ways of doing things that are kind of stuck in big company legacy thinking. They are really focused on having 99.99% SLAs rather than disruption. And so there you need a really good ventures arm who can translate between the startup world and the kind of more operationally orientated corporate world. So that's kind of the pros and cons of that. The other end is you have an innovation team, and they have these model stores and kind of sandboxes that they can get you into. So you're doing something, but you're not doing something that's real. And so, yes, we can chalk up a victory, but what does it really mean? Because that's not going to scale until you get out of the sandbox into the operational area. And then there's kind of this third category where we see these large corporates, and they have a program designed to trawl through the industry. And they basically have a set of contests and a process, and you do a bunch of stuff for free. And then at the end, maybe you get a POC. And that's probably our least favorite thing. Because it's kind of the longest path. There's no skin in the game. And so our response to that, frankly, has been to say, we don't do that, but we have our own program, which we call the early pilot program, where you do pay to engage. And so our kind of role is to politely thank them and then say, if you want to engage with us, this is our program for bridging the gap between the startup and the corporate.
Yeah. I get it. Now, Lotan, you're seeing, as you mentioned, you're bringing many startups to meet with the large corporates. Sometimes we actually do it together. When you're there in the room with them, what is the biggest tip you can give to a startup that is looking to partner? Like, what's the trigger words, if we can say, quote unquote, that they should look for in order to find a meaningful partnership?
I think it's a lot about communication and the right setting of expectations. Early stage companies management usually are very, very ambitious. They're very aggressive and had a very big vision. And I think one of sometimes the problems they're having is they're very passionate about their vision and they forget to listen. And I think a lot of the communications really depends on the big enterprise side, because changing the structure and changing the processes within the big company is very, very challenging, where the startup can be very agile and adjust itself. And sometimes when we are very aggressive on the sale and making sure to finish our pitch or trying to convince, we forget to listen and to gather all the information that will be required later on in order to make this partnership a successful one. So as being a fly on the wall in many of these meetings, I think that a good ending for that meeting should not be a very happy customer saying, yeah, it's the best thing I ever saw. It mostly means we have a lot of data and we have a lot of knowledge of what this organization really, really needs. What is the top 3 to 5 concerns they really, really have and that keeps them up at night. I guess that if we're not targeting that, if we're not getting at that out of the meeting, then probably we're gonna die trying to penetrate the organization, because it's very hard to change this priority.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ezra, a question to you representing the corporate. So partnerships are amazing, right? But at the same time, they're really, really hard. You have to go through different departments, you have to go through legal, you have to sign documents, you have to see there's the ability to scale. And, you know, it's either there's 1,000 ways to say no or death by 1,000 cuts. You prefer you choose the metaphor, but at the end of the day, there is a cherry there, right? And the question that I have for you is, what challenges do you see and feel that supply chain partnerships can actually solve in your universe?
Yeah. So first of all, I must say this is an experience for me too, because I got to learn so much about the other side of the table, like startup experience. I got to meet with, as part of my job, I got to meet with startups every day, and you know, there are some questions that is hard for me to answer, and I'm like, why is everybody's asking that? So hearing Lotan's comments, I'm like, okay, that's what their end goal is. So I will explain from my perspective. So I hope I will be able to give a little bit like how we are feeling or what we are experiencing on the other side of the table, on the corporate side too. So first of all, through like different means of partnerships, for example, like type of partnerships we do in DFC, Digital Fulfillment Center, we like doing, like I said, like co-developments, proof of concepts, co-innovation, which I understand not always preferred for startups, but in our perspective, like those type of partnerships help with the speed of building those partnerships for us. Because Amit, like you said, otherwise we need to deal with that big corporate engine too. And believe me, it's not a very pleasant experience for me either. So we like to kind of do those like fast disruptions and prove what we can achieve, and then take that value case across the corporation. That is one challenge maybe we overcome with those different types of partnerships. Secondly, again, I'm going to give like our perspective, and then I'm going to explain what I think can be some benefits for startups. But another advantage to us, or another challenge that those partnerships solve for us, is access to the talent and skills in those emerging technologies. You can imagine like Dell is a big corporation. We receive lots of like job applications among like different talents across the industry. But when it comes to digital skills, we have been focusing on this in the last decade quite heavily, but also, we may not be the first company that comes to the mind of, let's say, a blockchain expert. So those partnerships definitely helps us to gain that access to the skill sets. And I think from startups' perspective, how we can help through those partnerships is, first of all, I believe we can help facilitating an ecosystem connection. We got, as large corporations, we got close partnerships with large technology companies, and we require integration with those existing systems with these projects or partnerships we work on. So we can introduce startups to those like larger corporations and bridge their capabilities with integration with those systems. Also, I think, like I said in my response to the first question, fit for real life complexities is, I think, very important and something we experience every day. Like even as an internal development team, sometimes our teams struggle to understand the full domain knowledge, like what is happening on the ground. So I think through those partnerships, startups would be able to see how good of a fit their use case or their product is for the actual business problems that a large corporation is experiencing. And maybe one last quick thing, in corporations like ours, we are pretty strict or pretty careful, and we are trying to get better with that too, but with data security concerns. So it's not always easy to just like buy a product and implement it. There are like different ways that these services or products or platforms are provided. So I think gaining an understanding of working through those challenges too would help startups to scale in their operations and improve their products at the right spots.
Yeah, no, that the last point is really, really important, because at the end of the day, you know, it won't fall on the technology, right? It will fall on the security perimeter, it will fall on the cloud platform, it will fall on the GDPR. So definitely. Moving to another point, and Lotan and Steve, I'll refer this question to you. What we see is an increasing challenge for startups to really showcase their value in what the corporate actually needs, right? It's the difference between, we always, when we work with corporates, we always tell them, remember that in the room, you might be pitched like you're a VC, right? This is my technology, this is what I do best, and this is why I'm better than X or Y. But you're asking yourself as the corporate a P&L question, or an efficiency question, or a value question that is not always answered by, you know, that feature or that feature on the product. Now, what we're seeing more and more is the need to identify your value proposition in the value chain. So, you know, this is your array, and I think it goes back to what Ezra said about understand what we go through, understand what we do, and the challenges that we have, and see exactly where you're at. So Lotan, starting with you, how can startups identify, show, and actually execute on their specific value for that corporate?
I think there is a big debate, at least from the venture capital side of the table, when you're trying to assess companies. Once they're targeting a very crystal clear need or line item in the budget, it's very easy for us to validate that, to go and talk with customers and say like, hey, you're having this and that budget. What would you need to see in order to buy from this or that startup? And that's where the debate starts. When companies are having a very big vision, and when companies really trying to disrupt or to really help a very big industry like Williap, what Williap is trying to do, I guess that customers just don't have it in their budget, and they don't have it in their current plan because, like Steve just showed us, this without this role of like these stickers that can sense everything, it's unachievable. And sometimes I think it's need to time as a startup, the maturity of our technology, B, the maturity of the use case, and C, the maturity of our customer. And if we can time them all together, I think then it's the right time even for us as venture capitalists to get in early on and trying to gather all these things together at one point.
So, and Steve, how do you balance the need to stand out, right, from the noise, but also to show how you fit into the broader picture?
It's a really good question. And I think the situation we find ourselves in can be categorized under the heading of be careful what you wish for. We have this really disruptive technology. It can transform the supply chains of the businesses that adopt it. You add a computer that costs 10 cents to a polo shirt or something like that, and you can change a really large corporation's business, the way they manage the distributed manufacturing, the warehousing, the retail, starting to engage with customers. The problem is no company can execute that on a dime, and we need to prove our value very, very quickly. So simplistically, I think the answer we see is two key things. One is you obviously have to identify the quickest wins with the most value. It may not be the most value, but it needs to be something that can be delivered to make everyone a success, to show this, does this technology work? And in our case, we see that in putting tags on brands' products and then giving them visibility as to what's happening on the shelves in wholesale channels, where normally they'd have no visibility of sales or engagement. Suddenly, a company that doesn't own the retail channel can do that when they have a connected product. But we're still left with this challenge that the corporate, to really embrace this, needs to change processes, probably even change their structure, reallocate budgets. And that's where we end up. We realized 2 years ago, we have to partner with the management consultants. We ended up choosing Deloitte because they kind of got what we did. But fundamentally, someone needs to act as an honest broker between the startup. We're clearly biased about our technology, and they need to explain it in terms that the CFO of a large corporation can understand, believe, and trust. They have to paint a ABC path of, yes, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and then here's the nirvana, and this is how it's going to change your strategy, and here's how you need to look at the skills across your organization, and here are the 3 steps to integrate this into your SAP systems and so forth. So we can't do it all at once. We have to have partners, and we believe that management consultants are kind of a trusted party who can present an ROI. I mean, we can present the ROI, but no one's going to believe us. So we have to work with people who are more impartial and more credible.
So I think other than the fact that you should partner with Deloitte, that's what I heard from what you said. It's also the fact that make it real over sexy, right? It's even if it's not that glamorous, but it's real. It's an area to look for. But just before we move to the next question, maybe Ezra, just to get your perspective on that, because you're the one being pitched, right? And you're seeing all of that. What is the advice that you can give entrepreneurs in order to do that better?
Yeah, so in my experience, like for those solutions, when we buy those external products, we appreciate when a platform comes together with an ecosystem. I had meetings with a couple startups today discussing the technology. And in many cases, technology is amazing. Like what they are talking about, probably we can't keep avoiding it. But from my perspective, I'm like, I know that it is going to be really hard, just like what Steve said, to change this process due to these reasons. And I don't have planned budget or I don't have planned resources to enable it. So one way to overcome it, which from my experience I've seen successful, is try to build that ecosystem for your products. I think you mentioned it at the beginning too, so that I can just buy your product and onboard it just like with a click. So I don't need to go work with 20, 25, maybe 30 different parties in order to enable this technology. I think that is very critical.
Excellent. Now, before we move on into how to do those partnerships right, I want to make a claim and to see if you're, approve or disapprove and get your reaction. We identify more and more that kind of the high road for partnership is through tech alliances, because what we see is that as the incumbents and as traditional organizations are going through digital transformation, they need a digital backbone. Usually the digital backbone will be the large players in the field. And if you're looking for a way in, that's probably the easiest, if you crack it, the easiest way, because of, they're already there, they're doing technology, they know how to speak with startups, they're engineers, et cetera, et cetera. Would you agree with that claim? And that is open for everyone, that startups should spend more time about building alliances with large tech players and not directly with the corporates? Or you're saying it's kind of, sometimes it's a dead end, go directly to the end consumer?
I might say that I think you must establish alliances. You must go through partnerships. That's where I said she needs a whole ecosystem. She can't have like one chip or one solution or one app. One feature is not something that will work. But here's the pitfall, and here's the but. You need to remember all the time who is your target customer and what is the real problem that you're solving. And you must be careful not to solve your partner's problem, but to focus on your customer's problem. Sometimes partners should have their own aspirations, own interest, own data lakes, own data infrastructure, which is great. You have to integrate to that, but you always have to be focused from day one on your customer, because eventually you're going to have to sell to them. What we saw usually in the good companies, that they formed alliances on day one that been valuable only on day 10, but you have to start very early on. I guess that alliances and partnerships are the best way to scale, not necessarily to start. I think very early on, it can help you validate your market. It can help you establish discussions. It's not necessarily going to move the top of your line very early on. But if you do it right, I think it's going to be a very powerful weapon and the way to scale your business and build a very, very big company and business.
Yeah, I've got to echo that. And we make a chip and we have some RESTful APIs. So that's not what corporations want. They want solutions. And so to deliver that, we have to work with many other companies and organizations. And I kind of think of three kinds of technology partnerships. One is with these alliances or standards groups. So the Bluetooth SIG, we're this Israeli technology startup. Most people haven't heard of us. Most people have heard of Bluetooth. And the Bluetooth SIG is this massive organization with 30,000 members, some of the largest companies in the world. But we're taking Bluetooth to places it's never been before, to quote a Star Trek phrase. And so we've been really pleased. They've been super supportive of us. They retweet our tweets, but that doesn't actually build a solution. And so we found ourselves working with two other kinds of companies, the really large hardware, software companies, Hewlett Packard Enterprise, Aruba. So Aruba now supports Williap tags as standard in Aruba OS, the software that runs on the Wi-Fi access points that may be in the offices that we're not able to go to very much these days. So this ability for them to do a software update, push it out to hundreds of thousands of Wi-Fi access points is amazing. But the process of doing that, and it's happened, that took years. And so we also have to work with small technology startups. So we work with companies like Fanstel, who make our reference gateway, and they're able to turn things around in weeks and days. And since we started, we've created our own name for our ecosystem, which is Works with Williap. It sounds a little cliche, but sometimes cliches are good. And so what we're finding is that we have a mix of these really large companies that people trust, and these small companies that can be super agile and fill in new gaps that people didn't know about before, that are required to make a full solution that a large company can actually digest.
Ezra, does that, when you see a slide that shows the connectivity between the solution to one of those alliances or partnership, does that make it an easier digest for Dow?
I always ask for that because our enterprise architects always ask for that from me. They're like, okay, but how are we going to implement it? How are we going to manage it once we implement it, etc. So we always ask for that, definitely.
Excellent. So Ezra, let's stay with you. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm listening to the wisdom that you just shared with us. When should I start thinking about partnerships in your mind?
Yeah. So I think about like general partnerships, like Lawton and Steve had already given like great perspectives. I will talk a little bit about like partnering with large corporations like Dell, like what I look for when I listen in a pitch from a startup. First of all, having a clear value proposition is very important. I would say, especially for companies like us, like where we have our internal development teams, digital teams, like sometimes, honestly, like some of the presentations I walk in, I'm like, okay, we can actually do that. And with a quick research about like what DAO is doing in digital space, they will be able to probably figure that out. I think having a clear value proposition and having a clear value proposition for the customer you're meeting with is very critical. So we want to make sure we partner with those startups who knows us and at least have an idea about us and who knows what they're doing. Having at least a vision on integration with those larger enterprise systems is very important, because that becomes a big question mark when after successfully completing a proof of concept, when it comes to scaling the actual platform, solution, product. That is something we had to deal with. So we look for at least a vision on that. And of course, certain standards regarding data process security, data safety. We need to make sure that there is certain level of maturity that we can safely share our data and we are not going to be hurt from that.
Yeah, and that's the second time you mentioned about security and protection of data. So everyone who are listening, when you're working with DAO or trying to, make sure it's in the deck, right?
Our security team would be very proud of me if they.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Steve, your thoughts about that?
Yeah, security is super important. Gosh, 3 years ago, we were trying to decide whether what we should do about that. Because if you think about putting a tag on everything, it could be on a bottle of pills, a bottle of scotch, in your clothing. This is amazing, all of the data, but we quickly realized that this could also kill us if we didn't give the tools for large corporations to manage the ownership of that data and to keep out of trouble, to comply with GDPR. So we build encryption into our product, actually on the chip, and the unlocking happens in the cloud. And it turns out this is not only important in terms of the consumer, but it's actually a really interesting lever of power for the brand. You know, we with supply chain, it is one of the challenges is there's many very strong parties. There's the transportation companies. In our case, we have tags going on products in stores, and we have the brand that paid for the tag that's paying for the service. And, you know, how do you bring all those parties together? And it turns out that if you encrypt the data that's coming from this self-aware product and you give the keys to the brand, not only can they be accountable for data privacy, but they then have a negotiating tool with the retailer. In the past, retailers tended not to share the data about the products on their shelves. But if the brand is the one that has the keys, and they have to have the keys because of privacy, then they can negotiate sharing that data with the retailer, so that, yes, the brand knows how many pill bottles are on the shelf in a CVS. But, you know, CVS needs to know that. And if they're not told that, they're probably not going to open up their Wi-Fi access points so that the brand can see it. So this whole question of security actually leads us to questions about data ownership. And I'm going to plug Deloitte again. We just co-wrote a white paper on data ownership in the supply chain. That's where Deloitte is going to be publishing next month, that proposes some ways of mediating the interests between everyone that's involved in these very complex supply chains when suddenly products are self-aware and communicating with the internet.
I love the fact that it's 6:45 a.m. West Coast, and your examples were pills and whiskey. That's really good. But before we move to the maybe the last question before we open it to the audience to see, and please feel free to add questions over chat. We would love to get your questions and perspective from the audience as well. But Lotan, just before that, you have a very, very diverse portfolio, and you're sitting in many boards. When is the moment that you're starting to make questions about, or to raise questions about partnerships to the founders and the management team?
It usually happens in my first or second or third meetings with them, because I want to have a holistic view on their market and their vision and their roadmap.
I think Lotan has some internet issues.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. It's a new apartment.
No, it's the first time I said anything smart in this hour, and then now the line broke. I think that for us, partnering is really a way of working, and we partner with entrepreneurs all the time.
Yeah. So until he gets his internet back, so Lotan, you have some internet issues, so we'll move to the next question and chime in when you want. Sure. So the last piece for today is everything about scaling, which is probably the question for startups who would like to make something of themselves. But before that, just to get our perspective, putting the corporate hat for a second, executive have, in our view, three challenges. One is the challenge of basically harnessing, right? To see what are the relevant technologies out there and how you harvest them correctly from different parts of the world, right? And it's probably the 80-20 rule, where 80% of the innovation will come from 20%. I need to be active there, but still I need to harvest. The second challenge is how do I harness everything together into, again, we spoke about this, the platform, where does it sit in the tech array, on the stack, et cetera, et cetera. The third question is, does it scale? And I think in supply chain, it's critical, because supply chain, at the end of the day, it's not zeros and ones, right? It's real. Steve spoke about shelves. Ezra has facilities, factories, trucks. So the question of scaling is really, really important, because if there's, we speak always about time to market, we actually speak about time to scale. Because unless you get that critical mass in a very specific period of time, the corporate won't start with you in the beginning. So, and this is a question for all, and maybe start with you, Ezra. What is so unique about the scaling question in supply chain versus other areas?
Yeah, so again, I'm gonna give a little bit from like an answer from corporate perspective. So first of all, I think COVID had taught us so many things, but one other thing that it had proved is importance of agility. If you think of supply chain, like supply chains has to be agile in today's business world. Like you may have some unique product that people needed anyway, so you would sell it in any condition, but your supply chain has to adjust to whatever is going on in the business environment. Or there is the big focus, big interest, which is great in sustainability space, and supply chains are going to be impacted from that. I think when it comes to scaling supply chain solutions, startups has to make sure that their solutions are agile, so they are not gonna become idle in a couple of years. Also, supply chains are we are in a position that we connect the dots. So we, like the partners we work with, the products we scale, they have to work with all these different functions, all these parts of the business that we touch. They need to be able to work with manufacturing processes. They need to be able to work with requirements from sales, etc. So those are, I think, pretty unique about supply chain. But also, on the other hand, I must say, I'm I'm very proud for working in supply chain digitalization space, because I think supply chain had been behind the radar for a very long time. So there are plenty of opportunities about what can be achieved in supply chain innovation space. So that is like the challenges versus the advantages or the opportunities there.
Yeah. Notan, your view?
We had a panel discussion yesterday with the supply chain innovation heads of Cooper Bimbo, which is a baker, of Procter and Gamble. We all know Continental, again, different industries, and they all had the same thing in mind. They said supply chain is changing, it's adapting, and it's all about the data. They all complain about the same thing: data, 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 data. And I think if you combine it and then you can divide it to 4 areas of just generating the right data, and then connecting all the dots and just organizing the right data, and then analyzing and operating the data on the data, and then getting these feedbacks, the insights, and getting them back into the system and closing the loop. I think this is what we are all discussing here, this all discussion. And I think that very early on, we need to understand where we are in this whole structure. We need to understand what is our contribution, who do we want to partner with, in which step of the process, and how do we generate value to the big corporates that eventually have to change. And of course, they're going to do a lot of the work internally, but I don't think that they can do the whole thing within them with their own powers. And we have to find the right way to work with them early on. And I believe and again, this is we put our money where our mouth is. We believe that still huge things going to happen in that area. The likes of Williap are going to change the way that supply chain is going to look like in the future. And if we do the right connections early on, then scalability, again, and I'm not saying it's trivial at all, going to be always very, very hard. We're going to bleed a lot. But then if you do it right, I think that we can scale the whole data process and all the data transformation within these organizations.
Excellent. Steve?
Yeah, I think we think of scaling on 2 dimensions. There's the technology operational dimension, and then there's the business model dimension. And on the technology side, for us, it was, yeah, we can make maybe 100,000 tags, 1 million tags, but we probably can't make 1 billion tags. And so we realized we had to work with a company that some people might see as a competitor. Avery Dennison is the largest maker of RFID and NFC tags, but we were fortunate that they felt like it was worthwhile investing in us. And so they have incredible capital equipment production capability to help us scale at the technical level. We're a fabulous semiconductor company, so we leverage those big facilities over in Asia to make the chips at scale. But in a sense, that's the easy part. The challenge is supply chain is a team sport. And so how can we align the interests of the manufacturers, the brands, the logistics companies, the retailer, and the consumer to embrace this radically new technology? And so for us, it was about trying to put ourselves in their shoes and understand, okay, yes, brands what's the value proposition? They're going to preserve capital, reduce the amount of capital employed in their supply chain if they can get a demand signal from the shelf or from the consumer's home. They can drive a lift in sales because they can make sure that shelves are full. When you go to the store, you can find the product that you want. And from the retailer's perspective, they can expect better service from the CPG, getting the right product to the right store at the right time. And then from the consumer's perspective, why would I want this computer on my bottle of shampoo or my medicine? And so we're thinking, well, it's authenticity. Is this the real thing? Maybe, has this been preserved at the right temperature so this vaccine is effective? Or can this product reorder itself, building an Amazon Dash button actually into the container so you can subscribe to shampoo or even subscribe to Scotch whiskey, bringing us back to the alcohol in the morning.
Excellent. So we're close to the top of the hour. And I see, although the audience is mostly Israelis, they're a bit shy today and not asking questions. So before we sign off, and again, we didn't prepare for that one, but I do want to get one advice from each of you. What's the one thing that startups should think about these days with COVID or without COVID? Your choice, kind of a one sentence, the best advice you can give them. Ezra, starting with you.
Ooh. So like considering like
Wonderful.
these days, like everything we are going through, you mean COVID days?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure I got the question right. With everything going on, I think startups should realize that like themselves, companies, corporations, even large corporations are going through some difficulties too. So they need to, I'm going to go back to my point about value proposition or what value for the customer. When they pitch, when they meet with large corporations like ours, they need to keep in mind that we are in an environment that we need to juggle so many priorities at the same time too. And we run into certain business challenges every day. There are certain resources allocated to those challenges. So we are short on focusing on doing something new, disruptive too. Some companies like Dell, we keep pushing it. We don't make it a second priority, but still, I think they need to remember, make sure you know your customer you're meeting with, make sure that you make a value proposition, you make your value proposition very clear, and make sure that you prove that, you use that time to prove that you would be really a fit for that customer.
Excellent. Steve, your one tip?
This is a little bit motherhood and apple pie, but talk to your customer regularly. What we've found is we have customers that have been hit hard by COVID, others whose business has never been better. But you shouldn't assume. So we like apparel is an area that's really been hit hard. We found at the beginning of this crisis, our apparel customers were really, basically they stopped. And it would have been very easy to just write that off. But what we're seeing is a number of them have figured out how they're going to survive. And actually COVID is forcing them to be even more innovative. So how are we going to come out of this? And we're seeing a level of innovation and receptivity to new ideas from companies that if we hadn't made a point of checking in with them, even though we thought things were bad, we would have maybe overlooked some of the good things that are starting to happen as we start to see light at the end of the COVID tunnel.
Great. And to bring us home, Lotan?
I think that COVID created a very big challenges for large corporates, like for each one of us. But many corporates in many worlds, especially like the ones we're discussing today, have been compensated for many, many years not to do a lot, or just to play defense, or just to keep still, or not to change. And they were very against making like bold moves. Now, for some of them, their back is against the wall, and the whole supply chain must change. And startups have once in a lifetime opportunity to be part of this change. Because if you can sneak in when the world is a bit still chaotic, who knows how the world is going to look like in 2-3 years? Maybe it's going to be stuck and stable again. But if you can mold yourself into this new structure in these domains, you're there for life. So this is going to be my tip for them. Just look for opportunities in the very short term and be part of the transition, be part of the change for your customers and help them.
Excellent. So Ezra, Steve, Lotan, on behalf of myself, the audience, the conference, thank you very much for time spending with us today. Thank you to our viewers and listeners for the time that you've invested in hearing those insights today. And we wish you a great rest of the week, almost the weekend in Israel, and most importantly, stay safe. Bye, everyone.
Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ezra. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.